Hello, welcome in to the Late Night Gamecock Show. I am your host, Matt Anderson, and joining me, as always, is Alex Jones of the Big Spur. Alex, how we doing tonight?
Doing good. Got a lot to get to tonight. Even throwing in some basketball in there, and a lot of news we got to touch on. But it's that time of year.
And every summer, like once the 4th of July hits, it seems like Fourth of July gets here a little slow. You know, you go burn through May, then June, you're excited for the 4th, and then after the 4th, man, it's like a blur. I feel like we were just shooting fireworks off yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, you got it feels like that week or two in between media days take a while because you're still far enough away from the season where there's still not a lot to talk about. Then you have that week after media days where then you kind of just run into, okay, we're back to not have enough to talk about. But I mean, now we're 2 days away from preseason camp starting. As we all know, when camp gets underway, 31st will be here before we know it.
Yeah, well, especially considering today's the 30th of July. So, but anyway, really quick on this open, I do want to talk about 3 things before we hit the intro and have the meat of the show. But Alex, you were covering Kosi Barnes' commitment to South Carolina over the weekend. We've talked a lot about Kosi, a high 3-star, fits the mold of what Torian usually looks for in the secondary, a big, tall, athletic guy. Alex, any new takeaways that you found by covering the recruitment and talking to him and the coaching staff and whatnot?
Maybe not too much new that we already knew. I think one thing just being and seeing him in person again, as we've said, fits what they look for, just those long arms, tall, 6'2", somewhere in that range, and just a really great kid. It was a really great ceremony that they had a little video playing in the stadium, and the head coach obviously had some up on the Big Spur from their head coach Darryl Brown talking about Kosi Barnes. Like they all really love him there, and it was really nice to see all that going. But a guy that I think fits perfectly what they're doing, and I'm really interested to see how his senior year kind of progresses, because I think he could be one that maybe when you see more film of him get out, he maybe rises the rankings a little more just because he was such a late bloomer, I think, into the recruiting process. But I think a really kind of under the radar player and a nice get for South Carolina.
Yeah, and I think if you just go look at his offers list, you can go to thebigspur.com. You can look at kids' recruiting page for free. Just look at their offers. He, for a late recruit, kind of hitting the scene. He had a good offer list. A lot of SEC programs, ACC programs, and South Carolina had to do their due diligence to land him. So Gamecocks class is back in the top 25. Darius Gray made some ripples across the recruiting industry over the weekend. Kind of teased an announcement, and I saw some people get a little bit out of shape about a kid teasing an announcement. Well, he did release his final 2, and for me, if I was in his shoes and I got 250 people a day asking me about all the schools, I'd want to cut it down and just say, look, it's either going to be LSU or it's going to be South Carolina. I'll figure it out, let y'all know on August 22nd. So that's the 5-star. That's another out-of-state 5-star for Shane Beamer. Hopefully the Gamecocks can get that one across the finish line, because that would put the cherry on top of a really good offensive line recruiting class, Alex.
Yeah, if they, obviously, as we've kind of talked about, it feels like it's a South Carolina LSU thing for Darius Gray. And, if South Carolina's able to land him, you think about that offensive line class. He and Zion Giles being your interior guys, and that's a very good, interior line haul. And you throw in a Kamari Blair and then an Anthony Baxter, and you really like the potential of those 2 guys. And as you kind of mentioned, it would just be the cherry on top. And we've seen the classes that Lonnie Teasley, Greg Atkins, Sam Survey over there at the ops facility have built, and that'd just be another feather in the cap for those guys. He, as we've all seen, Darius Gray, he's 5-star, really, really good player.
Yeah, the other thing we'll hit on quickly, because we have other topics to discuss. Hale, I think, at least Hale broke it on thebigspur.com about Jeff Collins. Jeff Collins, you might remember, was a former head coach for Georgia Tech. I believe last year he was a defensive coordinator at North Carolina or something like that.
Yeah.
And long track record, coach of Nick Saban. Alex, what can you tell us about his role with the Gamecock coaching staff and anything else you picked up kind of behind the scenes?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be in some like a game planning type of thing is where he can make a really big impact. And as you kind of mentioned, having that head coaching experience as another head coach, and Shane Beamer kind of talked about this on Monday at the golf tournament. He's another head coach on the staff that or another coach on the staff that has head coach experience. Mike Furry was a head coach at Limestone. You have, the other guys who've been, coaches, and, Sean Elliott, head coach at Georgia State. So I think just you can't have too much of that and too many. And I just think, really good ad. And a guy that, another thing too, like he's got continuity with that defensive staff. Like he knows Clayton White. He's worked with Clayton White. He's worked with Torian Gray. He's worked with Shane Beamer back, I think it was in 2000 or so, Shane Beamer mentioned the other day. So just you have familiarity. You have a guy who, has, you've seen what he's been able to do as a defensive coordinator at Florida and Mississippi State and FIU and all of his stops as a D coordinator. So brings that head coaching experience. I think that's just something that you can't have enough of, just enough voices in the room that, kind of help all pull together.
Yeah, and I still maintain the best job in the world is a fired head coach at any college or professional level, because you will land on your feet somewhere and probably get paid six figures. But some people just aren't cut out to be head coaches at that high of a level, and they might just be great behind the scenes guys, helping scout, all that kind of thing, or maybe they're fantastic in game and recruiters, and they quickly find their way back on the staff and making $300,000-$700,000 a year. So I would like to be in another life a fired head coach at the Power 5 level. But other topics we're going to hit on: South Carolina hires Wesley Mallette or Mallette. We'll get confirmation there as we get to know him a little bit more, as Deputy Athletics Director and Chief Marketing Officer for Gamecock Athletics at the athletic department. Alex was at men's basketball practice today and media availability, so we'll talk to Alex about what he saw there. Football camp preview, as Alex said, we're just a couple days away from the start of fall camp. So we'll give our preview storylines we're watching, and we'll monitor those storylines as we head towards the football season kicking off against Virginia Tech. And we'll hit Alabama and Ole Miss as games we're going to preview in this preseason. And then after that, Alex, we only have 2 games after that. So we'll really be in the thick of getting ready for college football season.
Yeah, we'll hit those 2 games and be right in the middle of preseason camp, and like I keep saying, once we get into this preseason camp, like it feels like it's like a 4 or 5 weeks or so until the game, but those 4 or 5 weeks really fly by, and before you know it, we're going to be sitting here on a Wednesday night before that Sunday Virginia Tech game.
Yeah, Alex, and for someone in your shoes, the last 3 to 4 weeks really does fly. But for the people that are watching this show, I promise you, every day feels like a week. Every hour feels like a day at work, 9 to 5. But stay tuned to thebigspur.com, because when you are working and counting down the days to Gamecock football starting, you'll have a lot of good friends and folks to talk to about Gamecock athletics. So go to thebigspur.com, check that out. There's going to be some start of the season promotions. There always are. And for our money, the Big Spur and 24/7 Sports is the best in the business. But Alex, let's go ahead and hit this show intro. When we get back, we'll talk about Wesley Mallette or Mallette. Malia.
Gonna turn on the late night show, hear what's going down in Cool Town. I said I'm turning on late night show. Yeah, my Cox will let me down.
I'll tell you what, Alex, those late night riffs never get old in that introduction video. It's just straight fire. JC killed it.
It really gets you in the mood and ready for a late night Gamecock show.
Yeah, it does. And if you don't know, if you don't watch or don't participate in the early morning show and then the Gamecocks show, inside the Gamecocks, I don't know what it's called. I'm on it on Fridays and Alex is on it on Thursdays. But today's a free-for-all Wednesday or whatever they call it. So not only would you be able to talk to those folks in the chat box if you were watching from 10 to 2 today, but you will also be able to chat and hear with us. We welcome any questions, any comments. I want to shout out Queen and Steven and William for hopping on here and being in the chat box already. But happy to have y'all. It's a great evening. So, Alex, quickly, let's talk about Wesley Mallette. appointed Deputy Athletics Director, Chief Marketing Officer at University of South Carolina. From everything that I can find, it seems to be just a heck of a hire from a marketing standpoint, a brand standpoint, NIL standpoint. You look back at some of the places that he's worked at MTV, BET. He worked for UC Riverside, Cal Berkeley. He's been in the athletic department arena for a long time, being athletic director at UC Riverside, and got signed by Nike for athletics. He was named back-to-back 2023 and 2024 100 most impactful people in college basketball. So all in all, man, it seems like it's going to be a pretty strong hire and exactly what the Gamecock athletic department needs.
Yeah, when you kind of look at his resume and all the different things he's done, I think it checks a lot of boxes. You mentioned kind of the fundraising aspect of it. He also has the athletic director's experience of being the athletic director for, I think, since 21, I believe. And so, but I mean, he also had, as I mentioned, the fundraising. He's got the marketing part of it. So I think it's, kind of it seems like it's a really nice fit for Jeremiah Donati, and something that's going to really help South Carolina into these in this new era of college athletics.
I think so too. I like the fact that he was a two-sport athlete in college. I think that the more athletes and former college athletes you have in the athletic department, especially with these shifting times, really does help. And the last thing, Jeremiah Donati praised Wesley on his expertise in marketing, branding, NIL to enhance Gamecock athletics. He has a son that is a graduate basketball student athlete. So he's playing college basketball. He has a daughter that's a high school basketball player. So athletics are definitely important in that family, and they're important at the University of South Carolina. So we wish Wesley well, and hopefully we'll get him on the Chief Sport Network sometime soon, whether it's this show or the morning show or the afternoon show or all the shows. But Alex, let's talking about basketball and potentially what Wesley's impact will be there. Men's basketball had an open practice today. There was some media availability. Let's just go from the top, Alex. You saw probably a lot of the players. I don't know if Chris was actually practicing right now. I think he has to wait a little bit. But what's your initial take on what you saw today as far as the physicality standpoint, skill standpoint? I'll let you roll with it.
Yeah, so we got to see about 10 to 15 minutes or so of some 5-on-5 work. And so kind of went into it not wanting to key in on certain players, just kind of wanted to watch to see, who pops off, who kind of is the first one to catch your attention. And really the first one that caught my attention was Mike Sharab-Jumps, the Utah transfer. One, just his size, but then, I think a lot of the reason why he caught my attention so much was he was handling the ball a lot, which is not a surprise based on, John Whittle's reporting and everybody else's, reporting of, what they're going to do from a ball handling standpoint. But he was really smooth from a ball handling standpoint. And, I think the one thing you've always heard about when you, look back to his previous stops is just, his court vision and, finding open guys and the assist numbers that he has. And there's a few where he did it in both ways. He kind of did it from a transition standpoint. There's one time he was running down the court and I think dished it off to, I think it was Elijah Strong for a dunk. But then in a pick and roll instance, same type of thing, found the open man. And so I just think, he was one of the guys that really stood out. And Eli Ellis, I think he had some really good moments too. There are a few times where he got into the low block or low post and kind of created a shot for himself, made a couple of shots. And so I think, from those 10 to 15 minutes, it wasn't too much you can see, but those were the two guys that really kind of caught my attention. And, with Sharab-Jumps, I was kind of thinking when I was watching him, there's a little bit of Talon Cooper in him. Obviously, he's a little bit taller than Talon Cooper, but what's funny about that is, when we got to do the newcomer availability and we got to talk to Michi Johnson, or I got to talk to Michi Johnson at one point, and he said it directly. I kind of asked him about Mike Sharab-Jumps, and he says, Talon Cooper 2.0. So I think that's something that, is really kind of interesting just because there are some similarities. I think he kind of fits that Lamont kind of guard, style of being the guy who can control the offense. And again, it was just 10 to 15 minutes of what we saw today, but that was one of the biggest things that really stood out to me today.
I mean, I know it was open court. Essentially, it was 5-on-5. Coaches were probably manipulating, lineups, rotations, all that kind of stuff. The question that's probably on every Gamecock basketball fan's mind right now is how many turnovers did you see in the 5-on-5? Was it sloppy or was it pretty crisp?
It wasn't all that sloppy, to be honest. Now, and they had been practicing for a while too, so it wasn't like we had walked in right at the start of practice. So they probably, gotten, some of the kinks out from an early practice standpoint. But, for the most part, it was pretty clean. There were a few things I think when you're watching Lamont, probably wanted some things different just, based on, watching practice. But, I thought it was pretty clean. And, again, it's still July 30th in the summer, so it's hard to read too much into things. But, I just think,
we're gonna read in. I want to know everyone's field goal percentage. If were there any airball threes? Did anybody miss a dunk? What? Tell me everything, Alex.
Yeah. So I wonder. One player I did want to watch was Norton Capek. He was he's a guy that I'm really intrigued with. I wonder if he could kind of play a little bit of that BJ Mack role, and he kind of had his moments both on offense and defense. Miles Studi hit a corner three. That was one thing that I think when you think about Miles Studi, that's really the biggest part of his game and how he can impact games. When you think back to that Clemson game, right before his situation this past season, he was one of the big reasons South kind of won that game. And so we'll have obviously plenty of time to discuss this basketball team, but there were some things I liked that I saw from that team today in those 10 to 15 minutes, and then hearing what some of them had to say either about a Mike Sherrod jumps or Eli Ellis. All those guys really kind of praised Eli Ellis, and Kobe Knox called him a winner, and just all that stuff. I think you heard a lot of what you wanted to hear today.
Did any other freshmen make any waves talking to the guys, talking to the newcomers? I know Hayden has made some waves behind the scenes, and he's someone I'm very high on. Anything along the freshmen?
Yeah, Hayden was pretty good. I think he was one of the ones on that. It was either him or Elijah Strong. I'm forgetting now on that transition dunk for Mike Sherrod running down the court. But Hayden was pretty impressive when I was talking to him. Obviously, one just talking to him about Eli, but then kind of the transition that he's making from that high school OTE into college. I'm interested just how that transition is, not only not from just an OTE standpoint, but from a high school to college standpoint. And I think those freshmen have really kind of picked up. For the most part, are right where they need to be. And, they got, a few months here to the start of the season, but I think you like what you hear about those guys so far.
Yeah. The last thing really there, you kind of touched on thoughts from coaches and players. And look, all this is on thebigspur.com if you want to go check it out. Alex has at least some articles today I saw, and he's probably got a couple more in the chamber. I know how these guys roll. They like to hold some nuggets back. So stay tuned to the Big Spur. And Brian, good to see you and your mom, Jennifer, and Michi Johnson is back, and Alex saw him and spoke to him in the flesh today. So that's pretty cool. Alex, we can't finish, today's episode without talking about fall camp starting. We've done depth chart review. We could go through it really quick. We're not going to do anything like written down. Dylan Stewart's going to be a starter. Defensive tackle, I think, is still up in the air. The other defensive end's up in the air. At linebacker, I think Fred Johnson's a definite starter. Outside of that, Sean Murphy's made a lot of waves.
Mm-hmm.
So you can potentially see Sean Murphy as the other starter there. And then the secondary, I think Judge probably has something locked down. I think that DQ has his spot locked down. Kilgore probably has nickel locked down.
Kilgore, he's going to be playing. That's without doubt he's going to be starting. I think it's going to be at nickel.
Yeah, so if you just think about defensively there, you're going to have some defensive tackle talk. Alex, let's go ahead and have that. Yeah. Replacing a lot. I feel okay about the defensive tackle rotation. I think they'll easily be able to get to 4 to 5 guys. But 5 is that number, 5 to 6. 6 is amazing. 5 is great. 4 is manageable.
Yeah, I think from a starting standpoint, it doesn't matter too much just because of how much they rotate through. But I think right now, Nick Barrett, Monkel Goodman are two that you feel because they've been in the program, especially Nick Barrett, because just from a leadership standpoint, you hear about how much they talk about him and the jump he's taking. But he's also been in the program and worked behind those guys last year. So you like those two guys. Then you got Xavier Hardy, who's also in there. Troy Pikes. I think I'm interested to see how Troy Pikes, what they say about Troy Pikes, especially at media days tomorrow, just because he's was a spring edition, wasn't in for spring practice, but I think a guy that could very much be in the rotation, as well as Devontae Miles, a guy that I think has had a really good, kind of spring, summer of being in the weight room, and now it's going to be a big preseason camp for him. And I think it's going to be interesting. Like I think you're starting to see some of the numbers from them. From a depth standpoint, you're starting to see where it's really starting to form, and going to need to continue all those guys to continue to come along. But that the defensive tackle spot's going to be one that everybody's talking about. But I'm really I'm starting to think they they kind of got what it takes to, maybe, obviously you can't replace the experience of what those guys brought last year and Sanders, Huntley and those guys, but, I think they're going to be up for the challenge this year.
Yeah, and one guy you didn't mention there was Brownlow Dindy, who I think might be he might be the best pure talent on the roster, but getting him to give 100% every snap, rotating through. But I think that he has a bright future, and I think Travion's a great coach for him. I think you're going to see it shake out where you're going to have 5, maybe 6 defensive tackles, and some of those guys have extra years too. Some of them are young, so tacking on with the recruiting class they're bringing in this year, the 3 defensive tackles plus Pierre Dean's still out there. I think you can potentially see this team be really good on the defensive line. It always helps when you have Dylan Stewart.
Yeah, and you think back to last year when they had as many good D tackles as they had. They maybe rotated. They had obviously the 3: TJ Sanders, Tonka, and Alex Huntley. And then you had Monkel Goodwine also rotating, and DeAndre Jules. So I think 5 to 6 is kind of that number that you can. I think you can live with 5, but if you get to 6, that's really ideal. Just because you like to keep guys fresh, especially in the SEC. That's a line and scrimmage league, and the more you can keep guys fresh, the better you're going to be late in the game.
Yeah, lots of fourth quarter games there. The other defensive end, I'll be honest, man, I've heard really good things about Dez, and I've also heard really good things about, why am I blanking on this kid's name right now? The Syracuse Skier. I've heard really good things about both of them. I wouldn't be surprised if either of them is a starter, but it's going to be a battle. Any other names you see opposite Dylan Stewart right now?
Brian Thomas. Yeah, I think he's one to definitely watch. Like I've said it a few times on here and a bunch of different shows. Like, the talk last year was Dylan Stewart and Kyle Carter, rightfully so. Those 2 guys were the top defensive ends really in the SEC and 2 to top in the country. But Brian Thomas had a really kind of sneaky good season last year when he got in the game. Like he 4.5 sacks, I think 6.5 tackles for loss. Like he's productive and he goes just all out when he gets in there. And now I think he can be really, really good in those obvious pass down situations because he's so much quicker than a lot of these tackles. Like that's where I think he can really shine. I think he can help them too on those first and second downs. But I think JT Gear can kind of be like the wild card of it, just because I think you've seen what his potential was at Syracuse. He had really good numbers while he was with Syracuse, and kind of I think has just battled a little bit of some injuries, from a standpoint. But I'm really interested to see now that he's healthy what he can do.
The front 7 has question marks, no doubt. You have one bona fide stud in Dylan Stewart that's probably the best defensive end in the country. Like I said a moment ago, that helps. But then you look at Fred Johnson. I think he's locked into a starting spot, and the reviews about Fred Johnson, I don't know if they're quite at the level of what we were hearing about Lenore Sellers, but for a defensive player and a linebacker at that, I just can't reiterate enough how fired up the Gamecocks are to have Fred Johnson at linebacker this year.
And I think if it wasn't for D. Knight, Debo, and Bam Scott last year, I think he probably would have played a lot, and they would have been fine with it, just because I think he's that talented. He was already from a physical standpoint in a pretty good spot, but now having that experience of working behind those guys is only going to help them. And we mentioned it kind of off the top from that other linebacker spot, like Sean Murphy, Justin Okoronkwo, but Sean Murphy got a lot of talk at the SEC media days, and I think he's kind of taken on even though Fred has been talking about taking on a leadership role in that room, but I think Sean Murphy is too. He's got that experience, and that's one thing from a linebacker room. They did, it's kind of same with that D tackle room. They did lose a lot of experience with those guys who departed, but Fred Johnson, you saw it in the games that he played last year, really flashed and took in not only on linebacker, but he participated on a lot of special teams unit and made plays too. But Sean Murphy brings a little bit of experience, guy that Nick Saban signed off on Alabama, so there's obviously talent there. And then at the end of his Florida State last year, he battled injuries kind of early on, held him out to the middle point of the season. But really, when he got in later in that season for Florida State, he really had his moments and put up some decent stats. I think it was like in the last 4 games or so. So I think he maybe kind of flew under the radar a little bit from a transfer portal addition standpoint. But Cole Kubelik has said it, and I put it up on the site. Talking about how the success that Shane Beamer's had in the portal, and Cole Kubelik's kind of said, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 guys that pop up on this from the transfers that nobody was talking about. Because you think back to last year, nobody was really talking about Kyle Kennard or Demetrius Knight last year, and now those 2 guys were draft picks and are going to be playing in the NFL. So I think you have to like South Carolina's chances of hitting on some of these transfer portal additions, not just at linebacker, but throughout the rest of the team.
Yeah, you got Justin Orwankwo back there as well. Justin O, as they call him. He's a really good player too. I think Sean Murphy, if he is truly starting right now, I think it's still a battle between those two. But if he's truly starting, he's earned it, is what I'll tell you.
Yeah, and Jerron Willis, don't forget about him. I think he's done some good things from a physical standpoint. I think he got up to maybe 250, somewhere in that range, somewhere right where they kind of want him, and got kind of interested to keep an eye on. Then you got those freshmen. Like, I kind of wonder if Donovan Darden could kind of play that Fred Johnson role from last year. I think he's got that chance. But you also got Tayshawn Austin, who looks like, physically, in a really good spot. And you got Josh Smith and the rest of those guys in there. So AJ Holloway. So, it's going to end up being a deep room. That's another room they've recruited really well in, and just it's one that's going to be interesting. I think has a chance to be pretty good again this year. And then down the line, you really like the talent they have in that room.
Yeah, AJ Holloway looks like a brick house, by the way, for those of you who have not seen him recently. I would not want to get tackled by any of the Gamecock players, but especially not him.
I think Darden and Holloway can be those special teams guys. And we're going to get into more special teams guys here in a minute, I think, when we talk about the secondary. But I can see those two guys playing an impact.
Yeah, and with Sean Murphy, I think part of the reason he kind of went under the radar is you don't see a lot of success come from blue chip guys who go to Alabama and transfer to another blue blood, Florida State, and then transfer out again. But Florida State was an absolute mess last year. And when he got into this season was done by the time he got there and got able to play. So we'll see there. In the secondary, man, it's so hard to I'll put it this way, and I know I'm stuttering here, but do you think it matters who starts the game at any of the secondary positions and who rotates in? I mean, I think DQ needs to start and play a lot of snaps. Judge Collier needs to start and play a lot of snaps. And what we're hearing about Brandon Cisse is nuclear. It's just nuclear.
Yeah, he's been the one that, I think Sean Murphy's one that's been talked about a lot, as we mentioned, but Brandon Cisse has gotten a lot of talk too for what that guy can do. And I think also it's just a versatility thing with him. Like, I think he's big enough and good enough where he can slide inside to that nickel spot if they want to kind of do some things moving around, Kilgore, things like that. But I also think he, is going to be a really good corner. But also, don't forget about Bakari Swain either. Like, he had his moments last year. He really flashed, doing it all, kind of playing their pass. And, there's times, I think it was Kentucky, and you see him just flying in there to, work against the run. So, I think in that secondary, and we've talked about it a lot too, like they have so many different options that they can go to for some of those open spots. I think you feel good about any of them, really.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, you can go down to Peyton, Jalewis Solomon. I'm just going to tell you, they thought he was a 3-and-done guy when he was being recruited in high school, and so it's an absurd amount of talent. And I think just finding the right mesh and the matchups, because like you said, sliding down to nickel, Brandon Cisse might do that just for a game because there's a bigger dollar outside wide receiver, something like that. You never know.
That's why I'm saying I think they got just a lot of versatility and different things they can do. It's not just, all right, this guy can go in and play in this spot and, we're going to run this defense. I think they can move some stuff around. If they wanted to move Kilgore back to safety, obviously he can do that. But he's really good in that nickel spot. And I think that's, you saw it last year. But, Cisse, as you mentioned, can do it all. But, David Busey's another one to keep an eye on. He had some
Kellen Hunter.
Yeah, Kelvin Hunter, like you mentioned, Jalewis Solomon. It's Gerald Kilgore's back there too. Like it's just so many different options. That safety spot opposite DQ is one of the storylines. Like who's going to work in there. We've talked about Peyton Williams and how much he flashes when he plays in a Tennessee game last year, Vanderbilt game. So I think that other corner spot could be one. I think you feel decent about Judge Collier, but obviously they always talk about competition, and so I think that's something that you're going to see a lot of battles in that room, and throughout that secondary. But without a doubt, they got a lot of different talented options they can go to. Really, just about every spot in that secondary.
Yeah, and we'll talk quickly before we hit a sponsor break. Just talk quickly about special teams. I think that whoever's back there to return punts, whoever's back there to return kicks is going to do a pretty good job. I think, Joe DeCamillo's having his second year in the program, replacing a living legend in Columbia and Pete Limbo for a number of reasons, not just his football IQ, but his intellectual pursuits that he would share with the media from time to time and his players. So Joe DeCamillo has a fantastic track record. So I'm not worried about kick returns, punt returns. They executed onside kicks last year. They had some trick plays that didn't go their way, but were there.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I do think they want to be better in that standpoint, though, from a return game standpoint. Like, Shane Beamer's kind of talked about that. I think at SEC Media Days, do think they want to be a little bit better there. But now, again, they have options there. I think could a Nick Harbor do that? Those freshman receivers, are they going to be ready? Because you see some of the guys like Alex Sowers, or really just about any of those freshman receivers, they can handle that. Kilgore at that punt return spot, he was really good just from a they had no issues from a possession standpoint. That's kind of like the number one goal on punt returns is just make sure you get possession of the ball, and he was really good from that standpoint. But I think that's kind of one of the questions. So there's a lot of questions with special teams and everything they're having to replace. But what can they do to kind of continue to improve from return standpoints? 1, 2.
I think so as well. And then kicking, we'll just have to see through fall camp, and we'll come back. We'll come back to this at the end of the preseason, right before the first game. We'll talk about the freshmen we think might end up redshirting. We'll have a much better idea of the depth chart, who the rotation guys are, who the key guys are. We're going to hear all kinds of scuttlebutt from practice, and we talk to our sources, and we'll be here to tell you what we can for sure. But Alex, let's go ahead and hit a sponsor break, and I believe that sponsored this week is D's Wings.
Mike here for one of the better dining options in the capital city. When I first moved there, I asked people around the radio station, where are the best wings? Well, the consensus was D's Wings. That was then. Today, they still have the best wings, but it's so much more. Now in their new location at 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia, yeah, they get voted the best wings on a routine basis. Yes, they get voted the best sports bar on a routine basis, but they're not just about wings, and really, they're not just a sports bar. It is a family-run local restaurant and bar with 20 TVs and 25 beers on tap. And how about these daily specials? Every Monday night at D's, you've got 75-cent wings from 4 until closing. Tacos on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 18 wings and a pitcher of beer for $29. You've also got ribs and oyster bucket specials on Thursday. And no matter how big the party is, 20 or more, no problem. Just call ahead of time and they'll take terrific care of you. They'll do takeout as well. And guess what? A human will answer the phone and take the order. Billy and his staff do an outstanding job. Check out D's 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia.
As always, check out D's. We love D's. We know y'all love D's. Best wings in town for our money. And we do spend our money at D's. Real quick, want to give a shout out to Lance. Happy for Lance to join us. He is a Chief Sports Network lifer, and he is loyal to all the shows. We appreciate you, Lance. Really quick, too. Today, out of the blue, we had a sponsor reach out to me and asked if he could sponsor the show, at least through football season, through the bowl game. So we're talking details right now, what he'd like to do. If you would like to sponsor this show, you think it can help your business in any way, if you think it can help drive attention to your social media, whatever, let us know and we'll make sure to talk with you and get you here. We love D's, but we have room for others. Allow me and Alex to take a few snack breaks during the show because it's late night. We haven't had dinner yet, and Alex hasn't ordered his Moe's.
I have not.
But anyway, Alex, so let's have the same conversation now. Let's talk offensive depth chart. We'll do the same thing. We'll just run through it. Left tackle is going to be Josiah Thompson. Left guard, I think you can probably pencil a Tree in, at least starting fall camp. But
yeah. Maybe
so much flexibility. I don't know what they're going to do with them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's even, I'm not sure that's the style. Like, I could see it. I obviously see a Tree being that left guard, but that those two, obviously not to skip ahead on you, sorry, but those two guard spots are really, really intriguing.
Yeah, I think, we don't have to skip center. I think Boaz Stanley is going to be the starting center there. Then you have the guard positions and right tackle. Right tackle, until someone tells me it's not Case and Henry, it's going to be Case and Henry. But that's what fall camp's for. Tree is going to have every opportunity to go out there and play some right tackle and take that spot or play left guard. You got Trovon Bowe, who's a freshman All-American. I think he's probably going to be the right guard, but there's still competition at both guard spots. And don't forget those two transfers that came in with a year left at guard. They want to play. So no one's going to rest on their laurels and go out there and be a starter on the offensive line against Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and obviously the question just with the offensive line is obviously the starting five. But, I think one question, too, is how quickly in preseason camp do they want to have that starting five kind of locked down? Because I think last year they really early on identified those 5 guys and let them kind of build that chemistry through preseason camp. And so I wonder, obviously, you have to imagine coming from spring practice, they have a pretty good idea of what they want to do from the starting offensive line. But, how obviously there's going to be competition every day, but, how quickly are they going to, kind of identify and set those 5 guys, barring injury, to let those guys really kind of build that chemistry to get ready for week 1 and beyond.
Yeah, and John Strickland talks about it all the time. You want to have those guys locked in. You want them to know their role. You want them to be able to start, cross training, repping different spots. Once you got the majority of your plays and playbook installed in your formations, but you do want Big Tree to go line up at left guard, at right tackle. You want Trevon Bow to take some center reps because he might have to do that this year. Nick Sharp. I mean, you're going to have rotation, but look, we're going to talk about it, and I've been very honest with offensive line is the scariest thing for me as someone that covers the Gamecocks, and until they're a strength, I'm not going to believe they're going to be a strength. But this is the year I think that last year with the offensive line was decent, and I had high hopes for them. This year, I just think they're better from a raw talent standpoint, and now you got to get it out of them.
Yeah, I think it's just finding the right 5 that they want, and I think Tree is going to play a big part of that. Not only just from a talent standpoint, if they do think he's ready to be a starter, like where does he fit in on that offensive line? Because I think he can play just about every spot, other than center. Like I think he can fit in every spot. But I think obviously, as we mentioned, feel good about Josiah Thompson at that left tackle spot. But I think I think he's had a really good offseason. I think he kind of took what he could learn from that last season and really built on that in spring and took it into summer and is in a really good spot. And I think the biggest question for that offensive line is Tree Babalade, and one of the biggest questions is where can he fit in?
Yeah, and don't forget you have a Marquis Anderson back there who's just been hurt, but a very talented kid. You have a Blake Franks who redshirted last year, another very talented kid, and they're building up the offensive line. We talked about that earlier today. So they have dudes and they have bodies. And let's not forget, Torricelli Simpkins came from like Winston-Salem State or something, Alex?
Yeah, North Carolina Central.
Yeah, North Carolina Central, and became, on an NFL draft. Not an NFL draft. He was a prospect, but he's, got signed as a free agent.
I think it's a little bit the same thing we talked about with the secondary. Like they've recruited really well at that spot. So there's a lot of really good quality depth. And the biggest part of the preseason is just finding the right 5 guys.
Yeah, moving back to quarterback, Alex, I think we all know who's going to be under center starting week 1. But, that backup quarterback is still something that I can't shake. Aaron Nolan's been in the system just as long as Cutter Woods has. Luke Doty's been in 18 systems at South Carolina and at least been around Mike Shula the past couple of years at South Carolina. So is he the guy? I mean, Aaron Nolan said he was fine waiting his turn and getting better and learning and getting stronger. And so I think a lot of the people that are poo-pooing on Aaron Nolan, and I don't know this to be true, but he might be taking a redshirt year, if at all possible, just to refine his craft. So it might be a Luke Doty that runs out there first.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Luke Doty. And again, from what we saw in spring practice, too, wouldn't be surprised with Cutter Woods because he had a really good spring for a freshman. But from a Luke Doty standpoint, I think it's just he's obviously a very experienced guy. Has some obviously was quarterback early on in his career at South Carolina. The experience is there for him, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's number 2 on the depth chart. But again, like I said, I also wouldn't be surprised if a number 2 is needed. That it's Cutter Woods either.
Yeah, and y'all, I say it. I've said it a number of times now. Aaron Nolan might be the best thing ever. He might not be the best thing ever, but it is a lot to have a guy come in mid-game throwing left-handed in that situation. So that's the kind of thing that you need a spring and you need a fall, and you really need to get on the same page with your receivers. And we know he's not taking many first-team reps right now, or will be when fall camp starts. But, yeah, that won't be interesting to me. You think about running back. Yes, Rasul Fajan is the question mark that's still lingering. No, Alex and I don't have an answer on it. I will say that as I've dug more and more into the NCAA process for these waivers and injunctions and all of this, while it might seem like to Gamecock fans that the NCAA is screwing them, like the way I understand it is it literally whatever order you sent in your waiver request, if there were 2,000 before you, you're number 2001. And they're going to do this step of the process for all 2,000 before they get to you. So then they're going to say something, you're going to get a letter, then you're going to file another waiver. Well, guess what? All 2,000 of those people that were before or after you that got the same letter you got, they're sending it back in. They truly don't have any kind of prejudice, or they don't care about the blue bloods first. It really is just a process, and it's a department, and somebody is sitting in, their little cubicle, just check, not check, move it to the next person.
Yeah, and with Faison, like obviously as you mentioned, there's no updated timeline on when things can happen. Obviously, Shane Beamer will speak again tomorrow at Media Day, but the questions are going to start coming up here, and maybe not within the first week of practice, but maybe that week 2 head into week 3 is what do you start doing with reps if you still don't have an answer? Because obviously, if you're starting to get closer to August 31st and you still don't have an answer, like maybe you have to start playing that you're not going to have Russell Faison just because you got to make sure that Oscar Adaway or if whoever's going to be that number 1, or Matt Fuller, Gustav, or Jordan Howell, like it's just really going to be interesting to see what happens if there is no answer. Just because I think that's something you're going to have to prepare for. Like how do you manage the reps in practice? Because you do want to also keep Russell Faison ready to go in case Thursday night before the Sunday night game or Sunday game against Virginia Tech, you get word that Russell Faison is going to be cleared to play. So who knows?
Well, there's a couple aspects to that, Alex, because at least how I understood it from Darren Usher when he was on the show with JB, there are some waivers and things that you have to clear to even let him practice starting fall camp.
Yeah, and Shane on Monday, Birdie's Weaver Monday was asked, they're talking about Russell Faison and, are you still planning to let him, or is he still playing at practice? And he said, that's my plan. So I think they're going to just kind of roll with it. But that going back to what I'm saying, is just how long do you wait to not have an answer before you start really figuring out those reps?
Yeah, and there could be some gamesmanship there too with Shane saying the NCAA, well, he's got to practice, get y'all's butt in gear. But I feel very confidently when I say that I don't think South Carolina is going to do anything to potentially impact what should be a pretty good season this year. So just read into that what you will. I guess you want to go tight end or wide receiver first, Alex?
Let's do tight end first.
So a tight end, it looks like to me that even though Jordan Dingle came from the SEC, I don't think he's top 3 right now. I mean, how would you do your top 3 tight ends right now?
Michael Smith, Brady Hunt, Jordan Dingle, or Maurice Brown would it'd be maybe like an or right there. But Maurice Brown, I think, has had a really good offseason.
And he's a favorite. I mean, and I don't say coaches play favorites, but you have, if you don't like Maurice Brown, you got some problems. So go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, Sean Elliott, I think we asked him about him in the spring, and he talked about kind of his explosiveness and what he can bring in. You do see that. You saw it with the block punt. Like he's been really good on special teams for South Carolina. And I think you saw him score that touchdown last year. I think it was against Wofford. Like you've seen a lot of it. And like you wonder if now it's this year 3 into the program, is it now kind of his time to put it all together? And you can see it. I agree with Sean Elliott. Like he's got the explosiveness to do it.
Yeah, and I do think Michael Smith is the number 1 option, and I think you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end formations as well. That just puts extra blockers in there, makes the defense figure something out. Is tight end going to go out on a drag, on a curl, on a slant, whatever, or is he going to be blocking for Lenore Sellers or whatever running back it is? So let's move on to wide receiver, Alex. I think that Nick Harbor and Mazio are pretty safe as a starting 2. I would put Jared Brown as relatively safe right now. And Alex, this is not the same conversation we had last year. It's the same conversation from a numbers standpoint of who's going to be impactful, but it's not the same conversation about talent-wise, who's going to be out there and what they bring to the table. You know that Mazio Bennett is an SEC wide receiver. You know that Nick Harbor is on his way to being a top-flight SEC wide receiver. probably closer to a top flight SEC wide receiver than a bottom tier SEC wide receiver now. And then Jared Brown, there's just so much left that was untapped with him last season. And so then you go into, Dre Jacobs, a guy that's been around the program for a while. Then you go into the 6 freshmen. And I like Donovan Murph a lot. I like Brian Rowe a lot. I'm still giving the edge to Donovan Murph as the freshman to break out. Not because of anything I don't like about the other freshmen, but just he's so ready from a physicality standpoint to play.
Well,
so I want to see him in fall camp.
Well, that's, it's interesting you bring that up. Monday talking to Mike Furry, we were kind of asking him about Donovan Murph. And I think the question around Murph would be, being that he wasn't in for spring practice, is he kind of maybe behind a little bit, just behind those other guys who did have a spring practice? And he said not at all. And I think just because he was around so much, and obviously he didn't do anything like live on field during spring practice, but he was around and getting to know the playbook. So, and from a physical standpoint, he's right there with the rest of those guys. So the wide receiver position, I think, is really just kind of wide open because I think they have so many different options they feel pretty good about. But, I think Mazio and Mike Furry has talked about this too. He had a really good offseason. He's really kind of taken on a leadership role in that room. And he could kind of be maybe a guy to, maybe take that, a guy you can see take that next step. But Jared Brown's also really kind of intriguing too. He had his moments. And I think, Mike Furry's talked about this too, is last year he was just working to continue to be more of a better overall wide receiver. So you wonder now, having a whole spring and everything like that, does he take that next step? And then I think we've talked about Nick Carver a lot, and everything that's gone into his off season. So then you got those freshmen Brian Rowe. I think's got a chance to be to watch out for. The rest of Malik Clark, you saw it in the spring game. Donovan Murph, the rest of those freshman receivers, those. You have to feel early on in the season, if we're sitting here making a projected who could start in that week 1 against Virginia Tech, I think you. Right now, as we sit here, and this is just a projection, it's in based on anything I know. I think you feel the veteran players, the returners would get those maybe the 3 wide receiver spots, but I think they're open to just about anything. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a freshman in there as well. And again, they rotate that position so much, so all those guys are going to play.
Yeah, Alex, be very, very careful now. Don't give any state secrets out, or you got Shane Beaver Media Day tomorrow. You don't want to do anything that can get you in trouble.
Yes.
But so anyway, kind of talking about that, the wide receivers, it's not a Gage Larvadain that's out there, a Mighty Mouse that, I thought Gage looked pound for pound like one of the strongest guys on the team when I saw him last year. But, so keep that in mind. A lot of these guys have at least done something at the SEC level, or at least have really, really high recruiting rankings and profiles that are coming into college. Moving on to, is that all? Did we go? We went wide receiver. We went quarterback, running back. We talked briefly about Rasul. I guess the other battle would be who's going to be the starter. I think right now you think Oscar Attaway might be the leader in the clubhouse for the same reasons the wide receivers are the leaders in the clubhouse. Yeah. But it's going to take one explosive play from Teron Howell until the coaches say we need that on the field more.
Yeah, the rest of that room is really, intriguing just because I think you want to see, how those guys have taken the next step. I think you saw the flashes of Jawarn Howell, Matthew Fuller. But also I think, you're really intrigued by Isaiah Ostagov too, because I think he's one that you saw some of it at Colorado. Also, we've talked about the, whole situation with the offense and being a pass-heavy offense at Colorado. But I think it's in there too. And that was just for that time of the year, that's a really good get in the transfer portal. I think he'd be one that a lot of teams would want. So really, that's the question. The big question, obviously, is Rasul Faison, but I think you are interested to see what the potential of that room could end up being.
Well, Alex, before we move on to our Alabama and Ole Miss previews, give me a breakout person on offense and defense from fall camp, and I'll do the same.
All right, so from breakout, I'm gonna go under the radar to all right. So offense, we actually just talked about him. I was thinking about Maurice Brown. I'm gonna go with Maurice Brown. I think he could do it. Defensively, I'm gonna go Devontae Miles at D tackle. I could have, Troy Pikes is another one, but I think Devontae Miles has a pretty good offseason too, and a lot of it's going to depend on how things go in preseason camp. But I think I'll keep an eye. He's gonna be one I'm gonna keep an eye on.
All right, I'll start with defense. I'm going to go Josias Gear. Talked about him a little bit earlier. He was a big-time producer at Syracuse, kind of everyone's forgetting about him. Last year he was dinged up, hurt, never really got fully healthy. But this year, I like the fact, Alex, that I can kind of just let it roll with Kyle Kennard and just say, look, Kyle Kennard was successful in the ACC. Gear was successful in the SEC. All they need is a Dylan Stewart on the other side to rack up some big numbers because they've done it. So I'll go with on defense, I'll go with Gear because someone's going to have to step up at the other defensive end.
Yeah.
And then offense. Okay, this one's tough because I don't want to pick an offensive lineman because no one really watches offensive line and can really judge, who's doing well, who's doing not. Like John Strickland talks about all the time, like you're yelling at this guy on your TV, but it wasn't his job. So I'm going to go. What's that?
I'll throw another one in there, Jawarn Howell.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, just one 67-yard touchdown run where he leaves everybody in the dust. I'm gonna go Murph, man. I believe in him. I think that he is a weapon across from a Nick Harbor, across from a Mazio. I think he could overtake Jared Brown, honestly, by midseason. So I'm gonna go Donovan Murph. He's one of my favorite players I've ever seen at the high school level. So we'll go Donovan Murph, and then Alex, I guess let's move on to Alabama and Ole Miss, unless you have something else you want to hit.
No, I think both sides of the ball, we really kind of did everything, special teams we talked about. So that's kind of the fall camp preseason camp preview. And I guess by this time next week, they'll have a few practices on their belt. So I have to see what obviously they'll get full pads in later, probably in a few weeks, but I'm not sure when the exact dates of that will be, but we'll have probably some more news on everything with preseason camp next week.
All right. I agree with you. We'll be here to talk about it. So Alabama and at Ole Miss, this is our preseason game preview. We'll do the same thing we did last week. I really like that setting to kind of hit the highlights of players we need to talk about. Alex and I can fill in the gaps of other notable players on these rosters. But Alabama, according to Phil Steele, has the 10th best quarterback in the SEC, the 4th best running back room, the best receivers room, that's wide receivers and tight ends, and the 2nd best offensive line. And you look at their Phil Steele's first team offense, obviously wide receiver Ryan Williams is going to make that list. He's probably going to be a preseason first team All-American if those lists are out yet, and I would definitely have him there. At center, you have Parker Bracefield and offensive tackle Caden Proctor. So it's really nice when you have two of the best offensive linemen in the SEC and arguably the best wide receiver. At second team, they have an offensive guard, Jaden Roberts. Third team, a wide receiver, Jeremy Bernard. And then fourth string running back, Jamarion Miller. So, Alex, this is now year 2 of Kalen DeBoer, known as an offensive whiz, able to, get the ball rolling a couple different ways. And obviously with Jalen Milroe last year, that probably wasn't the brand of offense that he wanted to play, but how are you going to sit Jalen Milroe?
Yeah, and I think the big question with Alabama is this is a pretty big question. What's quarterback look like? I think right now you probably lean Ty Simpson being their starting quarterback, but that's a big question. You got to have somebody to get the football to Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard and those guys. And I think that's right now is the biggest question. Obviously, that's a huge question for any team, but I think Alabama has a lot of talent offensively. Now I wonder, year 2, Jalen Milroe, I think maybe just wasn't quite too much of a fit for that Alabama offense and what Kalen DeBoer wants to do. But I'm interested to see how this quarterback battle takes out because they got some talent there. Obviously, having to replace Haynes at running back, but Jam Miller is there too, and you got those talented wide receivers as well.
I think that it all starts with that quarterback battle. I think Ty Simpson's the leader in the clubhouse, and let's not forget, Ty Simpson's a former 5-star quarterback. Yeah, so it's not like you're going to Chris Smelly, who set prep records in Alabama playing Catholic school football. This is a dude, and no disrespect to Chris Smelly. I like Chris a lot, but just a different level. It's not Tommy Beecher coming in against NC State and Russell Wilson a couple years ago. On defense, look, this defense is going to be salty, and I think that when you think Alabama and you think Nick Saban, you think defense and dominating the pace, and later in his career was outscoring the opponent in a lot of situations because you had to, because SEC just got that high flying. But defense, he has their defensive line ranked number 2 in the conference. The linebackers ranked number 3. Defensive backs number 1, and special teams 3. So on defense, first team, he has linebacker Deontay Lawson. Second team, defensive tackle Tim Keenan. Third team, defensive back Damani Jackson. And fourth team, safety Keon Saab, which if you got a top 4, preseason player on each of those teams on defense, you got pretty solid units. And Alabama has one of the top 3 pure rosters in college football still. They really haven't dropped off recruiting-wise when Nick Saban left. So it's really just what happens with Ty Simpson if they have to go to the freshman quarterback. What can Ryan Williams carry an offense? They got Jeremy as well, Jeremy Bernard, but Ryan Williams is the focal point of this offense. Don't mess around there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, just defensively, like they got a lot of really good players in place. Like those linebackers, Jahad Campbell and Quay Robinson, like those are really good guys that Justin Okwankwo was having to play behind last year. But they also have really good players coming back. Like they got LT Irvington and Tim Keenan on that defensive line who had like 82, 85 tackles last year. So like those 2 guys are really good. And then you got some of those other guys like Quay Rossall at linebacker. And those, so I think, they did lose a lot defensively, but they do. Alabama obviously recruits really well, and they did really well in the transfer portal too. Kelby Collins was a guy from a high school ranked South Carolina was going after, and Alabama got him into the transfer portal as well. So he's going to add to that defensive line, and kind of just overall with Alabama, that Florida State game is going to be really interesting, just because it's a really big game for both teams, both head coaches.
And it's in Tallahassee.
In Tallahassee too, it's going to be that's Texas, Ohio State, Clemson, LSU gets talked about, but maybe the most intriguing game is that Alabama Florida State game, just because of how big it is for both programs and coaches.
Yeah, looking at it, Bama they'll host Tennessee the week before they travel to Williams-Brice, but they'll play a road game against Florida State. They'll play a home game against Wisconsin, and they will play Georgia and Tennessee all before South Carolina. So there's nothing. Alabama's not going to be able to hold anything back. We're going to see the best version of Alabama they can produce, and that's going to be a tough road. I think that Alabama fans probably expect to go 3-1 at worst, but there's a lot to break in this year. And going on the road in Tallahassee, I'm just telling you that place is going to be wild. My wife got 2 degrees from there. Been to Tallahassee, it is very similar to Columbia, and that stadium is going to be rocking. Alex, so we always give our predictions right now on the line. Right now, I'd say the Alabama game, October 25th. It's flexed, by the way, so it's either going to be 3:30 to 4:30 or 6:30 to 8:30 kickoff, so you can plan your trip to Williams-Brice. I would have Alabama as a 1.5-point favorite, even on the road at South Carolina, as things stand right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where the line is. And again, we'll learn a lot about Alabama in that first week against Florida State, just because I don't think we know a whole lot about Florida State and what they're going to be. And that's going to be, as you mentioned, it's going to be rowdy atmosphere for Florida State, and a long way to go till that Alabama comes to town. So we'll know a lot about again, it's just I think that quarterback situation. They get that figured out. I think Alabama could be a really, really good team, but that's a big question they got to get figured out.
Yeah, so you're talking about that. And look, we're doing a lot of these spreads right now, and they're all close. And really, Gamecock fans should be really excited about that, because that means that you can play with anybody in the country. We haven't done any lines that I think have been overly crazy. I think LSU, we said LSU minus 5.5,
something like that. Yeah.
So next is going to be Ole Miss. This will be a road game, November 1st in Oxford. When you look at how Phil Steele rated the offense, tied for 10th. So similar to Alabama, tied for 10th at quarterback, running back 14th, receivers 14th, offensive line 12th. So this is one of those years where Lane Kiffin's going to have to patch this thing together. As far as first through fourth team preseason, according to Phil Steele, they have 2 third-teamers, wide receiver Caden Lee and tight end Daquan Wright. So those are pass catchers. When you talk about the offense, Alex, Jackson Dart's gone. Ended up being a first-round pick to the New York Giants. Austin Simmons is in at QB. And if they made a Greek god quarterback, it would be Austin Simmons from just, a body style release, flick the wrist, the ball's gone. Former baseball player, had to give up baseball because Lane Kiffin said, son, you're going to put that baseball mess away and you're going to play football and be a first-round pick. If Simmons is great, it looks like this is the type of Ole Miss team that's going to be in a lot of shootouts. I think in years past, they've had a better defense than they have this year. We'll talk about that in a second. But Ole Miss is going to be in shootouts, in my opinion. You look at the schedule before they play South Carolina. They'll play Georgia and Oklahoma in the 2 weeks prior to the South Carolina game. So, Alex, thoughts on the offense, and then we'll talk a little bit about defense as well.
Yeah, offensively, obviously a quick point. They got a lot to replace on really both sides of the ball from an NFL draft standpoint. But I think, Austin Simmons, you saw what he could do when he came in that Georgia game and those 1 or 2 drives he played for Jackson Dart. You liked what you saw. I think it's just now going out there being, consistent with it now that he's going to be their starter. So that's kind of the big question. Obviously they lost at receiver. They lost a lot, but they got some of those transfers coming in and Stribling and Alexander and Ray and Wallace. Harrison Wallace was the guy, that from Penn State transferred that South Carolina was in on, I think, for a little while, or was at least monitoring, I think, in the transfer portal. So, Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin just about every year has, when they need to reload at certain spots, they've done pretty well to reload there. And so that's going to be the question, I think, really, not to jump ahead to defense too, but for this whole Ole Miss team, were they able to do enough in the transfer portal to really kind of reload from everything they lost in the really good draft class last year?
Well, it's funny. You think about 2 years ago in 2022 and the self-proclaimed, kings of the transfer portal. I think going to last season, Ole Miss had, I want to say it was 44% of their roster was a newcomer via recruiting class or transfer portal. And Lane Kiffin is running this program like an NFL franchise. He has no problem telling kids, this isn't the right place for you and trying to reload. And that's just college football now. It is. And not to go off on too much of a tangent, but it's why I don't have any issue at all with any coaches that take small recruiting classes, say 20 to 22 players, because you're going to have attrition from that class, but you also need to have spots to go fill those holes. And NIL makes it like free agency. Yeah. On defense, Alex, Phil Steele rates their defensive line 7th in the SEC, linebacking core 7th in the SEC. So right around middle of the pack. Defensive back 11th in the SEC and special teams 13th. They do have 2 linebackers on his preseason list. Second team linebacker, Suturanian, I don't know, Sunturine Perkins. I'm not a fan of your parents for naming you that because that makes no sense. And I can't even say it. Do you know how to say it, Alex?
It's Sunturine, I'm pretty sure.
Sunturine Perkins. Probably drank a lot of Sunny D in his life. And then linebacker TJ Daugherty. Those are 2 studs. And Ole Miss is going to have to see where their defensive line is. They had a really good defensive line the past couple of years, but let's see where they're at this year.
Yeah, Chris Paul was a really good, not the basketball player. Chris Paul Jr. was a really good linebacker for them coming from Arkansas last year. But those 2 linebackers are really good, a combined 136 tackles last year. But that defensive line is going to be the biggest question, I think. And obviously the secondary too is going to have some questions. But, you're having to replace Walter Nolan, who was really, really good at D tackle. And coming off the edge, you had Princely Humanely and who was pretty good as well. And J.J. McGee's on the interior was good too. But as we kind of mentioned already in the transfer portal, they did what they needed to do. I think from a on paper standpoint, Princewell Humanian, which is his brother, transferred in. And Deshaun Womack from LSU is also coming in. So guys that have potential. It's just I think it's Ole Miss has done well again with this. You got to have those guys hit in the transfer portal because there's so much to replace defensively off of a really good 2024 defense.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, Ole Miss will play Georgia and Oklahoma the 2 weeks prior to hosting the Gamecocks on November 1st. After that 3-game gauntlet between Georgia, Oklahoma, and South Carolina, they will have a bye week. So what shape are both these teams going to be in when the calendar flips in November, Alex? Is South Carolina potentially undefeated? Are they win-loss? If they're win-loss, that means they beat either LSU or Alabama and Oklahoma to get there. So this could potentially set up a primetime night game in Oxford. But on the flip side, we don't know what Ole Miss is. And we've gone over we haven't gone over Georgia. They're not on the Gamecock schedule this year, but we have gone over Oklahoma. And those are going to be 2 games where Ole Miss is going to have to get up off the mat from one of those. I don't know if it's going to be the Georgia game or the Oklahoma game, but I don't think they're going to win both. So just to me, the question is, where is Ole Miss by the time November comes around? If they are one loss, undefeated type thing, then it's going to be a crazy environment. Lane Kiffin's going to be talking smack. He's going to be feeling good. But at the same time, if the Gamecocks are undefeated or one loss team, they could go into Oxford and just punish Ole Miss after the two physical games they played before.
Yeah, that's, as you mentioned, it's going to be interesting to see where both teams are. Just from a South Carolina perspective, you're going to be coming off of 3 straight games of LSU, Alabama, or Oklahoma and Alabama. That's 3 tough games right there. But we'll see. That's going to be there's a lot of really intriguing games in this middle stretch for South Carolina, and key games and ones that we're still going to preview here to come. But that's one that's going to be really, really interesting, just because it's for one, it's a game that South Carolina had at Oxford. I can't remember the date now. The last or 2020 when they went to Oxford. It's been a little bit since they've been there, but so that's going to be another really kind of a fun trip, I think, just for fans, just because it's a place South Carolina hadn't gone to all that much. But should be a really good game.
Yeah, I'm thinking about going to that one, actually. I've never been to Oxford. All right, so we're going to give our preseason line prediction, and this is if you could bet on the game right now. I'd have OSU. I'll have Ole Miss minus 3.5. I think that all these Gamecock games we've talked about I don't think you're going to see a double-digit spread against the Gamecocks up until this point of the season unless catastrophe happens. Ole Miss, I don't think they're going to be reeling at this point, but they could be. So I kind of hedged my bets and said 3.5. Make the public pick a side and then adjust if I'm Vegas.
Yeah, the 3-point home favorite I think would help obviously Ole Miss, and it's like I was going 2.5 somewhere in that range, but 3.5 that's where I'd say somewhere as we sit here on July 30th making a line for the game.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I would take the Gamecocks plus 1.5 against Alabama at home, and I would also take the Gamecocks plus 3.5 against Ole Miss right now. And for the main reasons just being, I think that if you're playing Alabama, it's 1.5 point spread. Home field is going to be electric, and Gamecocks are probably undefeated if that happens. And then with Ole Miss, I'll take the 3.5 because I think that these two seasons could go in opposite directions for Ole Miss and South Carolina, and I'll take the value today, which I don't know if it would be there later. So, Alex, before we get out of here, so next week on the docket, let me look and see what we talked about doing. Where is it? I don't even know where my sticky note is. I know we're going to be talking the Clemson game and then one other. Which one was it, Alex?
I'm pulling it up right now.
Clemson and A&M, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Clemson and A&M.
So just so y'all know, next week we're going to be doing A&M and Clemson, and then we'll have some other topics there. We'll have definitely some fallout from fall camp, preseason camp, as Alex calls it. The 13th, we're going to have Building the Future. So we're going to be talking about the guys that are on this 2025 team, who's going to potentially be on the roster next year, the recruits. So just to show you how well South Carolina has been recruiting and, retaining them, what South Carolina might look like. And then on the 20th, we're going to give our South Carolina season predictions. We'll have a number of lists for you that Alex and I will have a lot of fun breaking down. I'm starting to work some of those out now. So if you would like for any of your, polls or topics to be asked about the Gamecocks that particular episode, let me and Alex know either in the chat here, or you can reach us on Twitter. Alex Jones has his there on the Big Spur. Mine's Late Night Gamecock, L8 Night Gamecock on X. So happy to have any kind of comments or anything like that. And then the 27th will be our Virginia Tech preview. And I promise you, it doesn't feel like time's going to fly, but it is. It's 100% going to fly. So there, I wanted to talk really quick to Chat Row. Frederick Cooper, we talked about Julius Solomon. We like him a lot. Thank you for being a part of the show tonight. Craig, my man Craig's here. Craig, we love you, man. Appreciate it. And I have a hard 3.5 hour car ride rule. Anything over 3.5, and I become an incessant toddler who has to get out of the car and walk around and run around. So 3.5 hours is my limit. So I'd probably be flying if I made that trip. I've got to see if I can get enough guys that want to go and see if our wives will let us and kids if we get off the hook for all that stuff. But I would love to go to Oxford. Alex, before we get out of here, really quick, just tell us about Birdies for Beamer or Beamer's Birdies, whatever it's called, and any takeaways you got from there, who you played with, all of that stuff.
Yeah, so as usual, I played horrible golf. Lost multiple golf balls, but we got better as it went on. Like got to play in my group was Alex English and Ty Corbin, so that was pretty cool to play with those guys, and Jordan Kay from the state as well. It was a fun day, and then getting to come back in and obviously had the Shane Beamer press conference, and then got to talk to a lot of the assistant coaches to kind of preview preseason camp and all that. And obviously, we'll still have a whole bunch of that coming up on the site in these next few days, and obviously with media day tomorrow, then it's on from there.
Well, Alex, I believe that you're on with Phil and JC tomorrow. What time can the good folks check you out on the show?
I will be on at 1:00.
All right, so 1:00, catch Alex tomorrow on the show with JC and Phil. Thursday is Alex, Friday is me. I'll be on the show 12 to 2, going to run the whole gambit with those guys. A lot of fun. I love being on the Friday show. It's really loose, and the conversation gets fun. So I hope to see you all Friday. And then don't forget, I believe next Tuesday or Wednesday, it'll be promoted on the show. But Shane Beamer will be on with, I believe he's going to be with JB. So it'll be that 10 to 12 time slot. I believe it's Tuesday. So make sure you're watching or listening. Shane is always so gracious with his time with this show and answers the questions thoughtfully. And I know that JB does his homework and tries to get the most information that Shane can give, and just let you be up to date on everything after the first couple of days of fall camp, preseason camp. So again, we have 4 episodes to go, or 4 shows to go before the season starts. So be here before we know it. Alex, any parting shots before we get out of here?
No, that was a really fun episode, and I mean, we went probably about 20 minutes more than we did, but I mean, I think we got pretty much a full preview of offense and defense and special teams, so really kind of set the table for these next few weeks.
All right, Alex, really quick, I agree. Give us your Moe's order. What are you about to order?
Oh, so you got to get the ground beef burrito, and then you got to get a side of queso, obviously with the chips.
Okay. I like their tomatillo salsa, that green salsa. Oh my gosh, it's so good. I mixed that with the Hard Rock sauce, and just like a little bit of Hard Rock, because you can really hurt yourself.
I either get that sauce or the Moe's sauce. Moe's sauce is really good too.
Yeah, the Moe's sauce is good. Well, I want to thank everybody here on the show that was in the chat box watching, being a part of this with us. We say it every week, but when you give your time to us for this fun show that we get to talk about Gamecocks, you give us the most valuable thing you have, your time, and we're always grateful for it. And if we can help you guys in any way, reach out to us on the Big Spur, in the chat box, private messages, whatever. We're here for you, and we love all y'all. So thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you next Wednesday. Have a good one.